Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Senate Education. It's Wednesday, April 7th at 1:32 p.m. We are going to start by continuing our conversation on H26. This has become known as the school construction bill. We're then going to return to the conversation we started last week around career and technical education funding. We had a request from that group, and we're going to pull that apart a little bit. And then I've had conversations with both Senators Ballin and Starr about S100, and I think we may have a path forward on that given yesterday's discussions. And so I'd just like to have some committee discussion and get a sense of if we can maybe move forward with an idea that we've talked through about maybe doing part of that bill. And then S114, Ms. Myers and Rep. Webb are available at 4, and they are, I've asked Ms. Myers to respond to some of the work that the House has done on this bill, and then Representative Webb will also give some of her thoughts as we make our way through literacy. So not seeing any questions at this moment, I think we will jump in. Welcome, Mr. Secretary, and Mr. Chair, great to have both of you with us.
Good afternoon.
And we are looking at H426, and one of the things that I know that we, and Ms. Ryan, welcome again, we had talked about was to have the State Board and the Agency of Education have a conversation around how best to move forward with regard to the responsibilities put forward in H426. In other words, where certain work will fall. And I'm wondering, I'm looking to really the three of you to help guide that conversation a little bit based on your conversations. So, Mr. Secretary, is something you'd like to start with?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, Dan French, Secretary of Education, and joined by Cassandra Ryan, and one of our subject matter experts on the school construction program as we once knew it and as we know it today. On your specific question, Mr. Chair, I have submitted written testimony, and I try to address that sort of in the beginning. The Chair of the State Board, John Carroll, and I are in agreement that there's a portion of 426 that speaks to appropriating a sum up to $100,000 to update the standards on school construction, and we're in agreement that that should be done by the agency. So one of my first recommendations in my written testimony is, yes, we agree with that work, but 2, that the appropriation should be designated to the agency instead of the State Board.
Okay, great, easy. And any particular reasons for the shift? It passed out of the House with the State Board. If you could just give us a little bit of help us again to understand that, just for even our own learning purposes here.
Yeah, I think anyone in Vermont, and even Cassandra, who's been on this topic for far longer, and I've been on the receiving end of this, and having been a superintendent that's implemented several projects. I think we'd struggle to understand the origins of the current regulatory language. We assume, as I think everyone's aware, that at one point the agency had 3 FTEs working on this. So we assume at some point that the agency had some expertise, technical expertise in this area that was utilized to help the board develop these regulations. But it's not clear to us the exact origin. So I'm not sure how this ended up going forward the way it did. We did not testify necessarily in support of this approach, and bulk of my testimony today is really about the COVID context relative to school facilities improvement, which is more or less the same testimony I provided in the House previously. But I think if the issue of updating is something you want to focus on, then I think it would be more appropriate to designate those funds for the agency to contract out, and then our expertise or the contracted expertise would be utilized by the State Board in development of rules.
Mr. Carroll.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is John Carroll, Chair of the State Board of Education. The Secretary and I do concur that responsibility for the development of what's called the capital outlay financing formula which is specified in H 426 as being assigned to the state board, and which, as I think I explained to you a week ago, I had advocated for, but the board, I think quite wisely, urged me to engage with the secretary to see if they could take that over. The reason being, of course, that it's a highly technical matter. The board has no employees, no expertise, and the agency either has or hopefully will develop, historically certainly has had staff who are knowledgeable about construction and who can oversee this work. And just by way of sort of why did it happen this way, I think the House acted completely appropriately in the sense that the rules regarding construction, school construction, like virtually all rules, are the duty and responsibility of the state board to develop with guidance and assistance from the agency. And this thing called the capital construction financing formula, which is listed in Part 2B of H 426, is stipulated in the rule as being the duty of the state board to update annually. And quite frankly, it's not been updated in 8 years. So that's why it came to be this way. But on further reflection and consultation with the state board and with the secretary, aware and concurrence, the number that I had recalled was $100,000 in connection with the capital construction financing formula being the estimate for the consulting assignment that would have to be contracted out with an architectural firm. The secretary mentioned 200,000, but I'm not sure if possibly that's for a broader scope of work that I'm not familiar with.
If I said 200,000, I misspoke. I have 100,000 in my testimony.
I see. Thank you.
So, Ms. Wasserman, would you, if you wouldn't mind, starting to make a list of edits and amendments that we will consider as a committee, including this one? Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Mr. Secretary, please.
If it's appropriate, I'd like to go through my written testimony a bit and just share you some thoughts, which are largely, again, in context, certainly informed by some work that's been going on for several years now with a group of superintendents and school facilities professionals, including some school architects in the state. But also what's really informed my thinking in the last 6 months or so on this has been our experience with COVID-19, and particularly how that pertains to improving school facilities issue, particularly as school facility issues pertain to safety and health concerns, which are a permissible or allowable use of the federal funds that we have before us. So just basically following my written testimony as an outline, we've already discussed this item around updating the standards and the capital outlay financing formula. I would also make the point that I think there's a need to update the regulatory framework, or excuse me, the statutory framework for school construction. I think this issue emerged from our conversation in the advocacy groups about basically just leaving the statutory framework intact. But I've made the point on several occasions that I think the statutory framework needs to be revisited as well. Firstly, as often cited, the Massachusetts process and experience with school construction. Like many states, Massachusetts has a sliding scale for reimbursement. Our current statutory framework just provides a across the board 30% reimbursement for any school construction project. I would suggest again that the statutory framework needs to be visited as much as the regulatory framework. And I would recommend a school construction aid process that incorporated communities' relative value in their grand list as well as student enrollments. But I think perhaps more importantly, there needs to be some emphasis on policy objectives. And this gets to the heart of what's the state's interest, in my view, in regulating school construction other than to provide additional financing. But I think we all agree that the quality of school facilities is directly related to the quality of education. And the state, therefore, has an interest in ensuring that school facilities meet sort of minimal standards, not just safety and health standards, but also educational standards. So sort of based on a perspective of, let's say, Act 46, but some of the governance work we've been doing across the state, and certainly in reaction to the very real demographic challenges the state is facing, both in student enrollments, but also perhaps more importantly now in staffing issues and staff availability. I think there should be some emphasis on policy criteria before we continue to make investments in school facilities. And in particular, I've observed, firstly, there should be a commitment to supporting elementary schools for the youngest students, as close to those students as possible, physically or geographically as close as possible. Those students aren't necessarily able to travel as far, but we need to have a priority on also getting students off to a good start. And I think that means a policy commitment to small schools, small elementary schools in particular, probably beyond what we've envisioned as a small schools grant, if you will. But then secondly, I think an emphasis, particularly at the middle level, on regionalization. We've done quite a bit of regionalization at the high school level, like many rural states. But we still have a lot of K-8 schools in the landscape. And I think in particular, if we were to subject those schools to a scrutiny relative to education quality standards, we'd find that they're deficient as enrollments have declined. In particular, it's, I think, in terms of the sciences and the arts, we're finding that many of those programs are struggling with attracting adequate numbers teachers and qualified teachers, precisely because they don't have adequate number of students to sustain the program. So I think the pressure from the demographic challenges should be interpreted from a education policy perspective as really revisiting the regionalization of middle level programs. And accordingly, again, I think there should be some incentivization, if you will, with school construction around policy objectives in education. So the last piece of that on section 2, I just point out there's a cost threshold for bidding in the law, in a different section of the law, 559. That's $15,000. Basically, when school districts encounter a project that costs more than $15,000, they're required to go out to bid. I don't believe that threshold's been examined in many, many years, and I think is sort of out of sync with what real costs are today. So I just picked a number out of the air, and I would suggest that number be increased to $40,000. Might support districts being able to move forward a little more quickly in some of these projects. I've heard that concern from business managers and superintendents, so I thought I'd bring it in here today for you to consider. Second section of this H 426 speaks to the needs assessment, which was something I was advocating last year. I think it was a good starting point. How do we wrap our arms around this idea of deferred maintenance and deferred construction as a result of the moratorium? I am now not in favor of doing this needs assessment at this particular moment in time, especially in light of the federal dollars we've received through the ESSER program and likely to be additional funding from the federal government from an infrastructure program. I think our focus now should actually be trying to make some progress on improving our facilities. I think if we did a needs assessment now, almost by definition, it would be outdated because districts are about to move forward, I would predict, at a period of significant facility improvement as a result of this federal funding. So I think it would almost be a better use of our time in terms of an assessment to do it after this 3-year period, after many of these improvements are about to be made. Yesterday, I brought forward a specific proposal that again emerged under the House 315 conversation around how I think we could help districts use those funds. There's basically 2 strategies there. One is to have the agency contract out for sort of a facilitator, if you will, an expert that could help districts coordinate the use of their funding with Efficiency Vermont and the agency's administration of the ESSER funds and so forth. And we found the Efficiency Vermont strategy sort of in this function to be particularly successful relative to indoor air quality. So that's what sort of gave me the kernel of the idea of how to approach this. As you know, we cannot direct school districts on how they spend their share of the ESSER funds, which is the larger share, the 90%. But we think it would be helpful to have some facilitation at the state level to help direct and coordinate the use of those funds. And then lastly, to establish a fund, $1 million for each of the 3 years to assist those districts that might have larger projects or might not have sufficient funding from their local ESSER funding to address their facility needs. And then in section 4, there's several, I want to say, smaller items, and I just included some bullets on them, specifically the idea of doing a report, which I think is really useful. It's kind of what we've sort of been provoked, I think, by this whole conversation, is looking at what is the statutory framework, what is the regulatory framework, what are the policy objectives, and I think the agency would be in a good position to do that. So I think that's a great idea. The next two, the school facilities management certification, capital improvement plan, I support both of these as well, though I do make a point that these are topics typically included in regulation in other states. And I sort of conclude my testimony with a bit of a conversation, if you will, on this idea of school district quality standards. Currently, our quality standards are largely focused on education and school level quality standards, not district quality standards. So typically, I think we'd envision, and what we've seen as a result of Act 46, that school districts are responsible for the maintenance of their facilities. And typically, these kinds of requirements, both for facilities management and capital planning, are included in those requirements of regulation. So I do support them. I think they should be imagined, if you will, in a broader regulatory framework. The limited service position in ESSER, as I've put forward already, I think that should be the contracting approach as opposed to an employee. The hiring process in state government is exceedingly slow. I'm afraid, particularly with the urgency around using the federal funds right now, that we'd lose some valuable time trying to attract someone, and we might do better both from a compensation and a timeline basis by contracting this out right now.
Secretary French, while we're on that, could you just say something about that challenge? Because I know we're talking about it a little bit this afternoon again with S114. And there must be, I suspect, some parallel paths sometimes. In other words, you're contracting, but also looking for a full-time person. Why is it easier maybe to find somebody to contract, work out to rather than a full-time position?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's, and this is probably the most challenging area for me to articulate a more cogent response in, because I do see ultimately the quality of school facilities as central to education quality. Therefore, the state has a significant interest in this, and therefore the Agency of Education should have in-house expertise to manage this program. I would say typically my observation in the last 20 years or so is that expertise of the agency was mostly on administering the financial aspects of the program. There is an intersection certainly with the quality oversight of the contract proposals or the construction proposals with administering the funding. But as we've seen, as I point out in the regulations, there's never been a real emphatic inclusion of facilities quality in our regulatory construct from an education quality perspective. We talk about basic inputs in the system, but there's never been included before after 1997 or so an acknowledgement that school facilities are an important component of school quality. And I say 1997 because before 1997 we had a process that existed, like in many states, of what was called public school approval, where schools went through a formal certification process, not only for their educational programming, but also for their physical plant and so forth, to meet basic requirements to operate as a public school. So I think in this specific issue, it's really about this moment in time. We are already having conversations, as we had with Efficiency Vermont, to stand up the indoor air quality program. I don't think it was ever contemplated that the agency would hire someone to manage indoor air quality in the middle of a pandemic. We're still very much in the middle of the pandemic, albeit sort of this last phase of recovery. And there's an equal amount of urgency, I think, at this moment to ensure the funding's there and that people can coordinate the delivery of services and so forth. The agency's capacity right now, I think rightfully, is focused on all these new financial programs that we're having to manage that are highly technical, including ESSER. I think it would be challenging for us to stand up a new program in that context, in that same division, I think it would be comparable to our relationship with Efficiency Vermont that's worked quite well, that we would benefit from having that outside the perimeter of the agency right now, so we could focus on the administration and compliance requirements of the federal funding, and put someone out or an entity out into the field that could help coordinate things a little more flexibly. And that's sort of the other piece. Is I don't think we have a firm sense yet of how this program will evolve and what the need will actually be. As you know, we're asking districts to do that needs assessment right now. If we had a better understanding of the regulatory framework, which I think we've admitted today needs to be revised, if we had a better understanding of the statutory framework, I could then translate that into sort of a stable staffing request. We're in a very dynamic situation, I think, and again, the urgency that, to me, I point to the idea that contracting would be a better approach at this moment.
Okay, thank you.
So the last piece, and it's sort of a conversation starter a bit on this idea of school district quality standards. Give you some history on that, we used to have this idea of school quality standards, and then in 2015 we shifted that to education quality standards, and these standards are in regulation, the state board's regulation. And we made that shift at the time, and I was a superintendent at the time. A lot of that conversation was around putting more emphasis on outcomes as opposed to inputs. But it's important to note at the same time that conversation was happening that we were also working on governance changes, and particularly Act 153 in 2010 included provisions, what were called virtual merger provisions. So Act 153 was a voluntary merger, if you want, as a school district, but it did force certain elements of education quality to be centralized at the supervisory union or district level. And a couple of the key ones related to education quality, such as curriculum and professional development, were required to be shifted to the supervisory union or supervisory district level, meaning that school districts would have responsibility for essentially the core school systems that relate to education quality. And that was a fairly recent innovation in Vermont. Prior to that time, schools on their own were responsible for their curriculum, and schools on their own were responsible for professional development. And certainly, part of Act 46 was a sort of a logic model that suggested that putting one school district in charge of multiple elementary schools, for example, could help the state address issues of persistent inequity, meaning that if one school board was supervising 3 elementary schools as opposed to 1, they'd be forced to confront the quality of the facilities among those schools. And I think it would be hard for them to justify one school having substantially better facilities than another. And unfortunately, that's all too often the case in our multi-district supervisory unions, when even in one school system, if you will, you can find significant variations in the quality of educational facilities, precisely because different boards were in charge of those buildings. So at any rate, I point to Massachusetts again as a model. Poor Massachusetts has been used a lot in our school construction conversations. But I point to their school quality framework, if you will, and it is a school district quality framework. In my written testimony, I observed that they envision, and I would say this is fairly common in many states, a more comprehensive set of standard domains, if you will, that includes, for example, leadership and governance. We don't have a standard for public school governance in our quality, which is surprising considering how important we believe local control to be to the quality of education at the local level. And the issue of governance has emerged quite quickly in our conversations on regulating independent schools. So we know it's a critical function, but we have no real regulatory expression of quality in statute or in our regulation. But in other states, it's considered an essential element. Curriculum instruction, assessment, human resources, professional development, a little more emphasis on human resources than we have professional development already in our sites, but human resources is not really mentioned in our regulatory framework. And I think increasingly this will be an area that's going to need our focus. We're as a result of our demographic challenges, I think we know there are staffing shortages across the economy. And I'm not convinced that COVID-19 has been the best recruitment tool for educators, and particularly with pension reform. I think districts are really going to be challenged in the future on recruitment issues. So there needs to be some attention to quality in this area. And we know a lot of districts operate schools with staff under provisional licensing and so forth. So this is an area that's going to need further attention. And this last bullet of financial and asset management, this is where capital planning, maintenance of facilities, and so forth fall. So Massachusetts is an example of another state that envisions all these elements sort of being sort of the domains of quality. And I would say if you compare that to our sort of conceptualization of this, that you will see ours is much more narrowly focused on issues of curriculum instruction and doesn't really include many of the operational aspects. So I point that out to you that, yes, I support those ideas in 426. I think it's part of a larger regulatory conversation that includes revisiting the statutory framework as well as the regulations for things like the capital outlay formula. And I think a good starting point if you're looking for a specific place to start from a statutory standpoint, I point to 16 VSA 165. That still more or less puts the quality focus on schools, not districts, even though Act 46 has sort of fundamentally shifted that. But also to include further description in the law, I think would be helpful to basically force the regulatory framework to be more broadly addressing all the areas of quality as envisioned by Massachusetts and other states. So that was more of this last section of my testimony is just more of a conversation sort of carryover from our conversation yesterday, but I promised you a little bit more on that and wanted to include some thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Committee, questions for Secretary French? Senator Persley.
I did have a question about part of the test. I think it was in section 2 part where you talked about the elementary schools. I don't know if I followed exactly what you were saying, and I read it and I still wasn't clear. But maybe I was trying to do several things at once. So maybe if you could just say what you're.
If we compare it to our current school construction standards and sort of the statutory framework, doesn't envision any policy requirement really. It basically says if you want to build or do a project that qualifies as construction, you can submit a proposal, and if you can get through that process, you will receive 30% reimbursement for the project. I mean, that's it in a real nutshell. It doesn't really begin to suggest that the state has an interest in facilities and saying, well, what should be the priorities? Should we be putting 30% of construction aid in anybody who comes forward and asks for that? Should there be some consideration, for example, in my old district where there are 3 K-8 schools within 10-mile radius of each other, should there be some analysis from the state's perspective? So that kind of, I gave you some examples there, and I think, just based on my travels and largely, 15 years in the kingdom, but also working statewide, that I believe that small schools will always be in our landscape necessarily. I mean, to deliver education in remote communities, and say in more rural communities. So there needs to be some policy emphasis on that, as opposed to saying, become efficient, small school, get as efficient as you can, right? And cut everything until your tax rate comes down at some point. And this is represented, I think, in our commitment in the small schools grant. We need to understand that that's going to be required, and we need to make a way for that to work financially. I would just suggest that from an educational perspective, a strong rationale could be made at the elementary level for that. It's harder for me to rationalize from an education policy perspective why we would allow high schools with, 30 students in them, that kind of thing. Right. Whereas a small elementary school, because of the need to focus on literacy and getting kids off to a good start, and the fact that the school probably needs to be geographically much closer to those students, I think we should just acknowledge that in policy and prioritize that. Right. So when an application came forward, we would say, okay, does it meet these criteria? To what extent does this fit in with the sort of the state's prioritization of construction of facilities?
Right, because in the past there hasn't been any of that. That hasn't been part of the application.
That's correct.
Process. So you're suggesting it should be. I agree with that.
Yeah, and so the conversation from an advocacy standpoint is really, we've been just trying to get this ball moving on school construction. As you know, there's been a moratorium. So the idea of doing a needs assessment just to get something happening. But I just continue to make the observation, particularly coming out of Act 46, that there should be, I think, some policy criteria put on the front end of construction. And I see construction and school facilities as being integral to education quality.
Okay. And Chair, if it's okay.
Please.
I agree with raising the threshold on the bidding. 15,000 is pretty low, given the amount of work that it takes to go out and get bids. But on the employee versus contractor, I also wonder if you've looked at, or what you think of, kind of expanding STEMP further, because as a state, we build up the state energy management program, not the old school energy management program, but basically creating STEMP to say that they're do both, since they're already becoming experts in buildings, they're state buildings, but they have the engineers and the knowledge on how to do bidding and how to do energy contracting and all this stuff. What about like creating a new position there that's just focused on education buildings and schools, and kind of, maybe even, sometimes is over at AOE to, just help with the coordination? Has that come up at all?
Yeah, I think it does. And it really speaks to sort of this dynamic we're in right now with COVID. COVID has accelerated a lot of issues in education that I would say we've just talked about. For example, I would say, in spite of my history, and I think Senator Campion knows as being a technologist in education, COVID-19 has brought us light years forward in technology and education, K-12 education. Not all good, but it's advanced it in a way that we probably never would have achieved without it. So we need to consider that. But I think it's also brought state agencies closer together. We're working much more on an integrated basis, and particularly with a rural state, I think it's absolutely necessary. But this issue of expertise on facilities, again, I will admit, I think we could understand that being necessary and a significant commitment on part of the state. So therefore, it should be represented in the agency staffing pattern. My thinking is we have this immediate need in front of us, again, to staff ESSER, to get the funds flowing, to help districts establish our priorities. And we're going to need some help facilitating that work. I certainly would like to see, if we're strategic about this, out the other end of that process, to see the agency grow its capacity to take this on a more permanent basis. But I think it also does require the statutory framework to evolve, the regulation framework to evolve. And that's why I think in 426, we have some movement in those areas. We also have a requirement for the agency to produce essentially a white paper on what's going on. So I think all those are important elements. I wouldn't want to settle on a staffing pattern right now based on a technical analysis without understanding the immediate tactical environment that we're in, which is really about COVID-19, this once in a lifetime opportunity to use the one-time funding to make sure districts are in a position, whatever they need, because they're sort of in the driver's seat to a large extent. They control the bulk of the funding, but they're also doing that needs assessment right now. And I think if we're smart about this, we can bring those things together. But it would be premature, I think, to have sort of the agency come in with a person to sort of control that dynamic when it's really now by necessity, because they control 90% of the funding, but also because we really don't know the impact of COVID-19. It has to be driven from the grassroots up, so to speak, and we need to help facilitate that. And then at some point say, okay, here's the pattern of work. Let's bring the policy framework online, and then we can come up with a staffing pattern to ensure this can go forward.
Okay, thanks.
Senator Lyons.
Thank you. I mean, it just sounds like everything has to happen at once, as usual. But so, yeah, I mean, this is difficult when all the resources are in one place, and maybe the standards, the quality standards and ideas for best practice is in another place. So I guess my question is, for this bill, what would you recommend in terms of trying to move everything forward, but also to provide some of the agency guidance that you're talking about? I mean, obviously Massachusetts has its own set of criteria. I don't know that Massachusetts completely fits with Vermont, but the round peg in the square hole, or vice versa. But the question about what are you thinking that might work for Vermont?
Yeah, thank you. I point to the language I shared yesterday on 315, which I referenced today.
I first, let me apologize. I was unable to be here for that testimony, so I will catch up.
That's fine. And it is, we use the phrase analysis paralysis. Things are so complex in front of us right now. But then again, it can be reduced down to some simplicity in terms of how do we move forward. And for me, I just come back to the money. We have unprecedented one-time funding in front of us. And not to say, particularly ESSER funding. ESSER funding can't be used for any school construction project. Everything still has to be tied back to COVID. But fortunately, many of the issues there are precisely the ones we have in our schools. They pertain to indoor air quality, safety, and health considerations. All those things dovetail perfectly with ESSER funding. So my point is the opportunities in front of us. Let's try to maximize the use of those funds in this area if we can. And we've already seen, even from the indoor air quality piece, I would say dipping our toe in the water, so to speak, we had difficulty putting enough money out there to do those projects, for a number of reasons. I mean, there's a limited number of contractors. It does take planning. But we also have related issues, as you know. We've addressed lead in drinking water to a certain extent. That program has slowed down a bit due to COVID. We have PCBs in front of us, and in the intersection between those two issues comes back to indoor air quality, which is the ultimate measure of sort of how these things manifest themselves to a large extent in the school facility. So I just would observe, in spite of we understand the complexity in front of us and how to move forward, but on a simple side of things, we have this opportunity in front of us, and let's try to manage it the best we can to address those needs. And once that's done, hopefully we come out the other end of it with a better understanding of what our approach should be, not just Massachusetts, but what our approach should be in Vermont. And also to one of the charges, I think in 426, to have the agency sort of lay out this white paper and to look at possible funding sources going forward. I think the key there is not only to come up with a magic source of revenue, which no one has, or else someone would have done it already, but to intersect that with what our policy priorities are as a state. Again, the demographic challenges are still very real. They were there before COVID. Those are increasingly going to manifest themselves in staffing issues for schools. And it's more than just finding a body. It's really about finding high quality personnel to do the work across the state. And we need to acknowledge that as part of the operating environment in terms of our facilities, and putting that together, I think, to do that sort of white paper while we're doing this other work would be really useful.
So, I mean, along those lines, what we have identified during COVID is also kind of the significant healthcare and mental health care needs within schools. And this committee did work on the after school program and some of the work that'll be going on summer and fall. But as capital construction goes forward, does it make sense to consider those sort of in-house healthcare related issues? And I don't know whether ESSER funds are available to make some special little nurse's office or what kind of, that, or counseling rooms. And then the other one that I think of with COVID, and you mentioned it, obviously, is broadband and technology.
Yeah, I was going to mention that as well. I'm going to add more complexity to the picture, but
may as well.
Yeah, why not, right? So we deploy broadband to small schools through a spoke and hub model. I mean, and that's what we call wide area network. So there's usually one big pipe of bandwidth coming into a district, then spokes are run out to the schools. And that's how we keep small schools viable from a technology standpoint. They can't really do that on their own. They need to be part of a network. But I think coming back to sort of that policy criteria conversation again, if we make a commitment, and I'll throw Finland in here, we talked about Massachusetts. If we want to get kids off to a good start, we have to acknowledge that's a healthcare conversation as much as it is an education conversation. We have to have a commitment to natal care and so forth. In my sort of outline I provided you today, talking about elementary schools being near students, we could envision those, I think, being community learning centers, being near students at those important critical years, and envisioning sort of the community schools concept or integrated service delivery really being intersected. Again, the policy priority of the state becomes, we need to get these kids off to a good start. Schools provide that infrastructure that's probably out in the landscape already to do that, but we need to think about what does that modern small elementary school look like? And this is kind of the conversation, the fun conversation we were having with the architects in the last couple of years. It's not about, putting a new roof on an 18th century schoolhouse. It's about what is a community learning center look, or what should it look like? What does it need? Does it need a nurse's office? Does it need a dental area? Does it need places for family, so all that kind of visioning needs to occur, and that's where the prioritization, I think, is going to be successful for Vermont if we can do it. It's not about just picking up the Massachusetts standards, but I think we need to interject that policy conversation into the front end of it and help that drive the limited resources that we have available. We also don't have the tax base in Massachusetts, so it's also probably more critical that we prioritize that than they have done. It's just add more complexity, but I think the starting point is, to me, is still the funding we have available right now. I wouldn't want to miss out on the opportunity to leverage these funds to sort of let the system evolve down those paths and be attentive to the opportunities that might emerge from that work.
Thank you.
Other questions for Secretary French? Mr. Secretary, so in reading this, there are several suggestions that for us to consider in terms of amending this bill. Anything else that you want to mention?
No, I try to be constructive in my feedback to you, especially at this point in the process. Not to say I don't try to do that always, but I've tried to provide specific recommendations. I think a takeaway, I think, would be on the needs assessment. Again, I understand the trajectory of this bill. I've been involved in its trajectory to try to bring this conversation forward last year and this year. I really can't help but question the idea of doing a needs assessment now when we're about to do a bunch of work, even without state facilitation. That's about to happen. So I'd strongly recommend putting a pause on the needs assessment until this period of significant investment and improving our facilities is over. But I do appreciate the 426 emphasis on the policy and regulatory frameworks, because I think we need to. That's the piece about capturing the themes and ideas that are about to emerge from this work. And I think we'd be in a good position to have the agency produce that sort of recommendation for you.
Senator Hooker?
Thank you, Senator Campion. And Secretary French, just to clarify the idea of the needs assessment and the information that you'll be getting from the districts that will inform what's necessary. And are you saying that we look at that, we use the federal funding to accommodate those needs, and then the needs that are beyond that? Because when you're talking about 3 years out, I'm thinking, well, this money's gone, and then what do we do?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there's just to be clear, there's a needs assessment concept in this bill that's really doesn't have its origins in COVID-19. It has its origins sort of this policy initiative. How do we deal with this backlog of school construction issues? Let's do a needs assessment. Let's go around the state, have it professionally done so the same standard is used to evaluate safety and health of safe and healthy issues, but also looking at 21st century learning environments. So we have some understanding of what's out there. And that, I think there's a $2.5 million appropriation recommended in 426. My point is, I would not do that right now. I'd rather focus on districts spending their ESSER funds to actually do some of the work, which we know is out there. So, I mean, the needs assessment would be useful to a certain extent, but districts, I would argue, are about to through their own activity under ESSER, about to address many of those issues. So when I was speaking earlier about the needs assessment under the recovery planning framework that we're having districts do it, that's where I think the confusion is, and I apologize for not making that direct connection. In our recovery planning framework right now, we're asking districts to do a needs assessment relative to their conditions in 3 focus areas to understand what's the impact of the pandemic on kids. That's not necessarily focused on facilities. That's about the social emotional status of kids, their academics, and their to what extent they're engaged with their schools, truancy, and so forth. So we need to understand the impact on kids. That's going to be a focus of the district sort of work in their planning, to focus on kids. The idea, though, with the funding is that they're going to have significant funding available. They already, under ESSER 3 in particular, districts have significant funding from the federal government. It's largely to be focused on recovery. But they're going to be in a great position to address facility needs, which are an allowable use of these funds that are sort of beyond the scope of our immediate needs assessment that we're doing relative to the impact on kids. But they're going to be able to focus on things like safe and healthy considerations in their facilities. So we want to support them in that work as we get past this sort of initial needs assessment on the impact of students. But that's separate from the needs assessment that's envisioned in 426.
But it seems as if by knowing that and the district's using the ESSER money to do the facilities improvements that they can do, that it would cut down on the needs that are left over for us to consider, down
Right,
the road.
and that's sort of my point, is that let's put the emphasis on getting that funding move. I mean, just to break it down into steps, right now we're looking at what the impact on students is appropriately. You got to put that front and center. But as we get past that in the next couple of months, districts are going to be digesting this large tranche of federal dollars, and it's multi-year investment. And facilities are one of the allowable uses, particularly as it pertains to safe and healthy concerns. That's a sort of a longer term prioritization. That's where we're recommending that the agency be given some funding to contract out a facilitator to help bring that work together for districts. Because I think, as you know, there are districts that are going to have no problem coming up with a plan to address their facilities or their plan to address student needs, but they're going to be those districts that don't have the capacity even to do the planning. And that's where the state facilitation is exceedingly useful. I think it's part of that equity piece, is like to make sure all districts are moving forward in these critical areas.
Thank you.
Senator Persley.
Secretary French, in your written testimony and the end part, the moving towards school district quality standards, I wondered if you made some comments in there about revising and expanding the current regulations. And so I wondered, and you talked about what Massachusetts does. Are you thinking that would be something we talk about in 426, or are you just kind of putting that out as a marker for some future date that we'd have that discussion in a separate, maybe even a separate year? Yeah,
I was talking with the chair. I particularly wanted to start to sort of talk about a larger strategic sort of piece of work. And it came up yesterday. I think the question was more like, what did I think about the role of the state board? And I tried to sort of say it's not really for me about the state board. It's looking at this regulatory framework. And I think it is important that we, sort of complete that piece of work under Act 98, certainly about roles and who does what. But my commentary today is not really about who does it. It's just like what should be that work, I think, before us as a state. And I think it is important to point to the statutory framework relative to the regulation in this area in particular. But I think it's critical work, particularly post Act 46, that we sort of, Act 46 took all sort of the glamour, if you will, and energy. But governance to me has always been a means to an end, not in the end itself. And I think we have to look at issues of the quality and equity. I think I always use those two words hand in hand. How best, and I see this as the essential state responsibility, how do we ensure high quality and that all students have access to that high quality statewide? And if we play out school construction as sort of symptoms of some of the problem, it's precisely because the regulatory framework in this area hasn't been active. The moratorium and our outdated regulations, that we have seen a widening gap in the quality of school facilities and opportunity in the state. So it's, I would say, failure, but it's because the state regulatory framework has not been an active player in the environment that this equity gap has occurred. So, I just include someone now working in state government, that the role of the state is to ensure that equity. And it's when the regulations and statutory construct are not working as actively as they should, that those that can shall build good schools, and those that can't figure out how to do it won't. And the state has a role in enacting quality across the entire state.
But do you think it should be part of it sounds like the answer would be no. You don't think this is a discussion for 426, this bill that we have, that this
Right.
is for a future conversation?
It's a bigger conversation. These would be themes I would try to draw out a bit in that white paper that's included in 426. Some idea of how to sort of pull these things together. And I think, not to harken on Act 46 again, but the front of Act 46, I think, really started to describe what would be educational policy goals for the state in the next 50 years. Doesn't, not to speak to the governance piece, but just so what are those goals? And I think it's sort of considering how to operationalize those goals more emphatically in the governance structure is sort of the next piece of work in front of us.
Okay. Anything else, committee? So Ms. Wasserman, do you have I'm sorry, Senator Hooker, please.
I do have a question, going back to the capital outlay financing formulas that are supposed to be looked at every year. And you mentioned that they hadn't been updated in 8 years. And I'm just wondering why.
I think the chair made that comment. My observation as a sort of being on the receiving end of this is because there's been a moratorium. The moratorium on school construction aid was enacted 2007, 2008, somewhere in that time frame. So, my guess is they haven't been reviewed due to the changes in the board, but the fact that there was no active school construction program essentially for the last 15 years.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
So Ms. Wasserman, you have this document. I'm wondering if you could pull together for the committee by Friday, if it work for you, some decision points. In other words, pull out what Secretary French is looking for us to, how he's looking for us to amend this based on the memo and anything else you may have heard, as well as if there are senators, I think perhaps Senator Perchlik, you might want to work with Ms. Wasserman on some language as well, so that on Friday we can just go through, take a look at what we have and some of the decision points we need to make before moving this back to the floor and then back to the House. Are you comfortable with that, Becky?
So you're not looking for language necessarily, just
you can do it however you would like. I mean, language would be fine actually for us. I mean, we don't need like a separate document. I don't see what Secretary French is proposing as, I don't see anything as very controversial. So I would suspect most of it would end up, I don't want to speak for the committee, but a lot of it would end up in the bill. So perhaps language, and then any language that maybe Senator Perchlik or others have at this point, we could take a look at all of it on Friday.
So I think some of it I can put into language. So I think actually scheduling wise, I'm probably not available on Friday to do it, but I could do it for tomorrow afternoon or I can figure out the scheduling, but some of it is I can easily put into language. I think some of it is a little more complicated. For example, there's a suggestion of the statutory framework for school construction aid to be updated. That's a pretty heavy lift. So that would require a lot. And I think it's also, I think that is more of a decision point discussion, because a lot of this bill is looking at sort of assessing what's needed in schools and looking at how to fund it, with the ultimate goal of establishing or reestablishing a program for how to do construction aid through the state, if possible. So updating a program right now without, I guess, a funding source, I think I think that's a policy question of, I don't know what direction you're going with the bill. Is the bill looking at sort of setting the path to be able to have a program, or actually creating a program? And I understand there's some distinction here between what the secretary was saying about use of helping schools use their ESSER funds to do
Right.
the more health and safety related projects. I
Mhm.
think there's also a lot of other construction projects that were done through the school construction aid program. So it's almost like there's two separate paths that you could take or do both at the same time. So I think that is more of a decision point. But I think by tomorrow or Friday, trying to redo the statutory framework
Sure,
for the aid program would be difficult.
sure. No, certainly, that's not the expectation here. But yes, if you could take, and maybe it is another way to look at it, really are some of the decision points that we need to make as it relates to what we've heard. And if you want to put those in statutory language, that if that would help you, that would be great. Secretary French, do you want to add anything based on what Ms. Wasserman just said?
Yeah, I would agree. I just sort of wanted to put that on your radar as being
Yeah.
a bigger scope of work. But I would say also just refer you back to the piece we did on 315. If you're looking for specific language on how to sort of do the ESSER appropriations, if you will, we spent some time sort of on our legal team putting that together, so that's available for your use. But I would agree, some of this is just sort of to admire the larger scope of work that's involved in this landscape.
So I can frame it as the sort of two paths right now of having the language in the bill that was proposed for 315 of how do you work with the school districts to implement what their construction projects that have to do that are related to health and safety needs due to COVID, and have that contracting sort of position, and then leave in the language for right now this needs assessment that I think touches on some of that, but maybe also touching on more areas of the kinds of school needs that schools have right now. And so that would just be a decision point for the committee if you want to do both or just one or the other.
Right. And I think that sounds fine. And I think what I'd like is if you could just get it to us by tomorrow or Friday, and come in on Tuesday, and Jeannie will put you on the agenda for Tuesday. I think I just, for one, just need to see something, a couple of paths, a couple of options, and what different things have been floated, just so I can get my head around everything. And I think maybe that'll help committee members as well. And then, Jeannie, can you put Ms. Wasserman on the agenda for Tuesday to come back in and?
Certainly.
Okay. And take us through some of these. How does that sound to you, Becky?
That sounds great. I can do
Okay.
that.
Committee, does that sound okay? Okay. All right. And I know Senator Perchlik will probably be working with you a little bit on some language. Okay.
Great.
Thank you. So Secretary French, if we could transition, you and we talked a little bit in this committee with Jim Demaray and Mr. Carroll around a path forward for some language, reworking some of the roles, duties, responsibilities of the State Board of Education. And as I believe I mentioned to you, we have a possible vehicle on that that is leaving government operations. And I don't know if you and Mr. Carroll have had an opportunity to talk about that. What I'd hoped would happen is perhaps the two of you could come together and have a conversation and see if what has been proposed, it works for you. And I don't know if Mr. Carroll is still there or not, but go ahead, Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some conversation. Again, largely my characterization based on where we ended up on I think it was S-166 last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I talked about sort of that negotiating process. I honestly haven't paid a lot of attention to the sort of new version of this in GovOps, and I can definitely heat that up and have that more direct conversation with the chair and the state board to give you, I mean, in this condensed moment of time, my perspective and see if we can have consensus perspective on what's doable right now. I would just observe it is a bigger piece of work that's worthy of some deliberation. So I wouldn't have been surprised this session to see it start to emerge immediately. But I also wasn't surprised to see COVID-19 sort of overtake all the energy in the room, so to speak. So
yes, and just to be clear, and you're refreshing my memory from your comments yesterday, I don't think anybody on the committee wants you to redirect your focus away from the pressing priorities that you're dealing with. So, and I, these are things that we can get to, if you will. But if there is any bandwidth at any point for the two of you,
I would. I'm just saying it hasn't been on my radar per se, but
understood it. I think
Yep.
it popped up. Senator White proposed again that there's this vehicle, and this committee thought, okay, if it were to work, I know Senator White is looking for our endorsement or for us to say, hey, let's put on the brakes. And I'm more than comfortable following your lead and Mr. Carroll's lead on this, given everything else that is on your plate right now.
Yeah,
all of a sudden the headlines say Campion said to work on this and not.
Yeah. No, and I also don't want a headline saying Secretary French uses COVID-19 again as an excuse for not getting things done, right? Because I've been very careful not to do that. I just, I at heart, I'm a pragmatist, so I really enjoy sort of the larger philosophical agreements and disagreements I have with Chair Carroll. And I look forward to having that sort of larger geopolitical conversation. But from what I'm hearing from you is that you'd like us to react to the specific proposal that's before GovOps. And I'm happy to put on sort of my pragmatic hat and see if we can come to some construction.
I think we lost you there for a moment, Mr. Secretary.
Frozen for me.
Yeah, frozen.
Some of his thoughts on that piece, and again, it's a much smaller conversation, which is easier for us to sort of find agreement on as well. If you want to make progress on that this session, but let me work on that and get back to you fairly quickly. I'd say by next week at the latest.
Yeah, and we did lose you there for just a moment. You froze, so I just want to make sure that we got everything that you said. Is it possible for you and Mr. Carroll to also coordinate a little bit and have a conversation? Sure. Okay, that would be great. That would be great.
Well, I think it's more useful to you if we can at least identify where we have agreement and where we don't. So I will reach out to Chair Carroll on the specific piece of GovOps is working on and see if we can move that forward for you.
Great. Excellent. Mr. Carroll, would you like to add something?
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Yeah, this is John Carroll. I was listening in, but unable to activate my my mic. So I did share with the Secretary last week the draft that I furnished to you all last Thursday. And so I'm sure that the Secretary and I will find time, perhaps in the next 24 hours, to chat over the phone about this and find our areas of mutual agreement and any concerns that he may have, and maybe jointly we can give you a written response or meet with you perhaps on Friday afternoon if you'd like.
Sure. I was actually going to ask Jeannie if it works for the two of you a week from Friday.
Okay.
If that works for the two of you, knowing that, just to give you some more space and time to think about.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. I don't have that direct control of my calendar right now, but a week certainly is doable.
Is that okay? Jeannie, does that work?
Fine.
I just want to make sure Jeannie is capturing this.
And what I'll do, since John's here, I'll have our staff reach out to schedule a time for you and I to sort of get together on that.
Right.
And then we'll be prepared to have a conversation with you next week, or at least I'll be on that end. So
Thank you.
I apologize for being behind on this.
No, please, no apologies necessary. And again, if either of you feel that this needs to be postponed, given everything else going on, please just let us know. But for now, we'll just have Jeannie hold a spot next Friday for this conversation. Great.
I've made a note of that.
Great. Terrific. Thank you. Okay. Anything else, Mr. Chairman, that you want to add?
No, thank you, Senator Campion and committee. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, anything else?
No, I think I'm in tomorrow again. So
You are. So
look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.
Yeah, and just
3 days in a row.
What would be helpful, I think, in general, is just maybe talk a little bit about some of your. This is again for those watching Secretary French's confirmation conversation, hearing some of the things that you particularly are proud of that you've accomplished during your time, and just going forward, what are some of the big goals? I know that would be something that's a way to kick off the conversation, and then I know everybody will be up late coming up with tough questions for you. So if you could we'll plan on you coming in, maybe, I don't know. I don't think it'll take more than 3 hours.
Oh, good. I was thinking it would be much longer. That's good.
No, we're really looking forward to it. So
yeah, likewise. Thank you.
Yeah, it should be great. Okay. Okay, committee, why don't we reconvene in about 10 minutes? Okay, welcome back to Senate Education on Wednesday, April 7th at 2:52 p.m. Committee, senators will recall we had some of our colleagues from the career technical institutes, if you will, schools, centers, come in last week talking about struggles during COVID with regard to admissions for many different reasons. And they asked us to consider a hold harmless provision for their full-time equivalents. That's how it was framed up, as I recall. And I sent the letter on to Mr. Desmarais, Mr. Peralt, and Ms. Parker. And I'm wondering if the three of you could just come in and start by telling us, because we do have new members to this committee, maybe what the hold harmless provision is, to remind those of us who are old and let people who are new in on this, and how and what they're asking, and how, whether or not this is something that we should be considering, how we might be considering it, as well as other committees that might interact. I think this also might be something that finance would be interested in hearing. So with that, I don't know who would like to begin. Jim, please.
Yeah. For the record, Jim Desmarais, Led's Counsel. My voice is breaking up a lot on this microphone this morning. Can you hear me clearly?
Crystal clear.
Good, finally. Hopefully that stays. Before going to the hold harmless, let me go to how it works now in statute, which will frame what they're asking for. And what they're asking for, just to briefly mention, is very similar to what you did last session on holding the ADM count level for a year because of the decline in enrollment for homeschoolers, right? So you basically did a similar thing that they're asking for, I believe, for ADM, for public schools. What we're talking about now, I believe, I wasn't there for the testimony last week, but there is a statute. It's section 1552 in Title 16, which establishes how career technical centers set tuition. That tuition they set is paid by the sending school district. So we have area career technical centers that represent a geographic area of the state. I believe there are like 13 or 14 areas. And the school districts around those areas send their students to the career technical center in that area. And so the sending schools are sending students from their district to the CTE, and they're paying tuition to the CTE, okay, for that student. And the way the tuition works in statute, I just read you two short subsections. First, it says each career technical center shall establish a tuition charge for secondary career technical education. The amount shall reflect the actual cost of attendance in the career technical courses offered by the center. So basically, the career technical centers are setting the tuition to reflect their costs. And then the second thing to read to you is, it says the tuition charged to a school district, so to a sending district within Vermont, should be based on the average of the district's 3 prior years full-time equivalent student enrollment in the career technical center. So I believe, because it's based on a 3-year average full-time enrollment, with the declining enrollment that they've had because of COVID and other factors, they're concerned, I think, that the 3-year average will be too low for them.
Right.
So I think what they're asking for, what the letter says at the very end, it says, to stabilize the funding, a solution would be to create hold harmless provision for FTEs. This would be for the time frame of July 2020 through June 2025, which would be held at a level no lower than the March 15, 2020 FTE counts. So I think what they're saying is, rather than using the 3-year average counts that we use the statute, we'd notwithstand statute, and we use the count from March 15, 2020. And that would be in place for, looks like 5 years, July 2020 through June 2025. So I think that's what they're proposing. I'm not sure if I'm right about that because I don't have all the context, but just from what I'm seeing in their letter, when I'm reading the statute, is what I'm basing my comments on.
That's very helpful, and I'm inclined to support your analysis of the letter. So, Jim, so March 15th, 2020, and this may just be my ignorance, but how would people know that year the CTE amount is higher than if you were to take the average?
I'm assuming that they picked that time point because
so they chose that time point.
Yeah, they chose it's March 15, 2020. So that's the very beginning of the virus. So they're choosing a point in time that was right before the virus really hit.
Okay.
So I assume their counts were higher then.
Yeah. Okay.
And the 3-year average, as you roll forward into future years, if you have a bad year, so you have 2020, 2021 as a bad year for enrollment.
Yeah.
This is the 3-year average that will roll forward. It's going to affect the count for a couple of years, or I guess 5 years, according to their request.
No, this makes sense now. I'm sorry, I was not a good question, but I think I've got it now. Anything else you were going to add to that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. First of all, I'm not sure I'm right. I'm just, again, framing what I'm thinking, based on what I'm seeing. But second, I'm not sure what the effect is on sending districts. Well, I do know the effect. The effect will be that they'll be paying a higher amount of tuition than they would have, presumably, if the statute was used. Because obviously CTE centers are trying to get a higher tuition, and sending schools are paying it. So therefore, sending schools will have a higher bill. And there is a process in statute for the state to basically reimburse sending school districts part of the tuition they're sending over. So I don't know whether with this provision to benefit the career technical centers, whether there has to be a corresponding provision to help protect the amount that sending school districts are paying. So I'm not sure about that. The person that would,
I'm going to jump in, Jim. I think that
please
last
do.
is not correct. I don't think the state's subsidizing the sending district. I think that the money just comes off the top of the education spending in that district and goes. So the districts are paying the full freight. It's just broken up into two separate payments so that the actual tuition that the center's charging is not as big as it actually is. It doesn't look as big as it is.
That's right. I can add a little bit more to that also.
Go ahead.
I do know that the Agency of Education is in charge of calculating an amount equal to 87% of the base education amount per full-time equivalent student. And that base education amount is an amount that fluctuates a little bit year over year based on inflation. But this year it's about $10,500. And so a portion of that is managed by the Agency of Education to reduce the sending district's amount of their education spending. So really just trying to manage that funding source. But it does end up coming from their district.
Okay. Senator Hooker, please.
So it makes sense then that the sending districts will be paying that higher tuition despite the fact that their kids hadn't been at the technical centers, because the technical centers are trying to maintain sort of a status quo so that they don't fall behind, but that means the sending schools are paying that freight as well.
Yes, because that formula is based on the number of full-time equivalent students.
So
Yeah, please go ahead, Senator Lyons.
no, I just so in a sense, it's an enrollment based payment system. So numbers of folks who are enrolled, whether they attend or not, are paid for.
The answer is yes, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, well, because I asked that specifically because we have a system in at least one of our care programs for children that is not enrollment based, and it does cause some financial hardship along the way for the facilities if it's not enrollment based.
Yeah. When you say enrollment based, I think it's, enrollment based, they would be attending the Career Technical Center, so they'd be enrolled there, right? Is that what you mean?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
I believe that's correct.
So I guess one of the things and maybe this is for Mr. Pearl or Ms. Parker.
Oh.
Is this kind of thing, I mean, in general, is this something that in your experience would be particularly controversial? I mean, is this something that you think historically our friends in finance, would welcome? And I'll of course talk to the chair, but just trying to get a sense of whether or not this makes sense to you.
So we have a hold harmless provision in current law that limits the loss of your equalized pupils from 1 year to the next to 3.5%.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, you used to be able to carry that forward. So if you were continually losing more than 3.5% of your kids, it kept increasing the number of kids that you were getting paid for that you didn't actually have enrolled.
Mm-hmm.
That provision caused a lot of problems over time. There was one school district that ended up having close to half of its kids, counted kids for equalized pupils, were phantoms, kids that weren't actually there. So a couple of years ago, we changed the provision so that every year you looked back to the prior year for the 3.5% hold harmless provision. So if you were consistently losing kids over time, you weren't building up this backlog of kids. It was determined each year.
Right.
By looking back to the prior. So that's still part of current law. I think I don't have the proposal, actually having a proposal in front of me, but if this would be in place for 5 years, I think it would be more problematic. You'd be getting back to the phantom student problem that you've had in the past. So
even though they're not proposing phantom students.
Well, they are in effect phantom students because you're holding, if I understand it correctly, you're holding ADM fixed at a specific point in time. And then as enrollment continues to decline going forward. But, that brings up another issue. I mean, enrollment's been declining in Vermont since Act 60 was passed back in 97.
Yes.
It's been consistently lost. So in a sense, you've got high schools and tech centers competing for a diminishing population of students, which is part of the problem. I looked recently at some data, and the tech centers have actually done better than the high schools have in terms of retaining kids. In other words, more kids have moved from the high schools over to the tech centers. So I mean, and then the other thing I've noticed is that there's an issue with the funding formula, but it's very complicated, and I can't imagine that you could use. One of the things in the letter was to change the underlying formula, and that's a huge undertaking, I think, this late in the session. So I was focused more on the short-term solutions that they've been looking at.
Yeah.
And so this I think would work. I'm not sure how the committees in the House would view it.
Right.
But it would end up increasing tax rates, property taxes.
Sure. Mr. Brault, would you mind sending the committee and Jeannie the enrollment data that you've looked at that has shown that would be, I think that would just be helpful for all of us to have, and Jeannie can post it to our website. Ms. Parker, did you want to add something?
I was just going to add a comment and say that it may be a bit complicated to track how many students there are and how many students are the phantom students or holding harmless. And I know that Brad James at the Agency of Education is the one who is administering the current funding formula and would likely be in charge of coming up with a new formula or a new system for accounting for these students. So I would just recommend that if this idea progresses, having Brad James come in and speak to this in more detail.
One other thing I might want to throw out is that based on the letter I read, the tech centers think that at least part of the decline in enrollment they're seeing is attributable to COVID-19.
Yes.
And to the extent that they could demonstrate that that's the case, you could use ESSER money to tide them over until they recover from the immediate impacts of the pandemic hitting. Doesn't address the longer term problem they have, which is just we've got fewer kids every year, but it would address this COVID specific problem. Whether or not they could meet the federal regulations for demonstrating that the decline in enrollment is COVID related rather than our general decline in population, I don't know, but it just occurred to me that may be a possible option.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, and I appreciate it. I wonder, Mr. Brault, are there, I would think that their next question would be, well, what do we need to do to prove it? I mean, some of the stuff they shared with us anecdotally was, if you're working in a particular class, whether it's food industry or technology, your students are going to be close to one another, and that is of concern during a pandemic, of course, wherein maybe in other classrooms you can spread out. But so they felt as though parents they'd heard, were suggesting kids not, take this path at this point. So what sorts of things would they have to do to lock that up? Because I think it's a great suggestion.
Yeah, I'm not sure at this point, but Brianna and I could go back and look at the regulations and the guidelines around the different pots of money that's available.
I'd be grateful for that. I think the chair of approps is also interested in, and I think our committee in general wants to be helpful in any way we can be. Senator Hooker, do you have a question? I
do. It just occurs to me that talking about how do you prove this? I mean,
yeah,
a couple of the people who were witnesses testified to like a 40% decrease or 60% loss, and I mean that seems really above and beyond the kind of attrition that we've been seeing.
Right.
Technical school. Yes. So I think that would be easy sort of to show. But my other question had to do with where did the 5 years come from? Whether, I mean, I could see they were talking about a 3-year average. Right. Are you talking about maybe these kids are starting in 7th grade, 8th grade? I don't know, and then that would or 8th grade to 12th grade, 7th grade to 12th grade, whatever. I don't know. It just seemed like a long time.
Right, 5 years going forward to be for the
Yeah,
hold
yeah.
harmless. Yeah, we could always have them back in. I think they were thinking that perhaps national statistics and other things, and I'm just speculating, show that it's going to take 5 years.
Interesting to know where they came up with the 5 years as if after talking about 3-year averages.
Right. Yes. Good question. Any other questions? So to me, a path forward would be, and I'd be immensely grateful if you would both be willing to go back and find some of those guidelines around how our CT centers could indeed prove that this has been a COVID impact, and we could then work with approach to see if there's a way to connect them to ESSER funds.
Okay, we can do that, and I'll get you the enrollment data.
Oh, that would be great also. Thanks,
Okay.
Mark.
Yep, you're welcome.
Any other questions for either Mr. Peralta or Ms. Parker? And do either of you have anything else to say? This has been incredibly productive and really helpful that we might have a path forward.
I think this is all for now. We're happy to do some more research on the other options available.
Okay, great. Thank you both very much.
Yep, you're welcome.
Great. Okay, while we're on a roll, I might as well talk about S100. And then we have Chelsea and Representative Webb coming in at 4. And I apologize that if there is a long stretch of time in between when we finish this discussion and the 4 o'clock, it couldn't be helped only because of schedules, but I apologize. So S100, one of the ideas that we heard yesterday, and I've spoken with Senators Ballant and Starr about this, and that is the idea of doing universal breakfast, starting off with universal breakfast. We heard from Ms. Kruger that many low-income families, there's data to show that low-income families take advantage of breakfast, having breakfast available, which is great. And so do a lot of middle-class families take advantage of that opportunity. You know, I think we may have even heard from some of the family people on this call, in this committee, you know, who have children that say, hey, you know, on a busy day, have breakfast at school. And, you know, to start the day off with that sort of communal experience with your peers, nutritious food. It also, we heard, helps with attendance, getting students to school. It sounded like a nice, good way to sort of start a process. Attached to that, we would, as I think Senator Lyons mentioned yesterday, is there a way to also put some kind of study/implementation plan together where we could create some language that would eventually get us to universal school meals, and have people really working on that, you know, during the summer. So the start, I think, and we have to take a little more testimony, but I think the you know, this is I think I saw something about a $6 to $9 million cost, again, for the universal breakfast. Tied to that, we would also, I think, propose the idea of using some ESSER dollars to help with that transition, and see if something like that could work. And then putting together, attaching to the bill as well, some kind of way to move this conversation forward, answering some questions around where, you know, how might federal funds in the long term help us, engaging our federal delegation, all those kinds of things to get to universal school meals. So that's what I'm putting on the table. And I was going to have Mr. Desmarais draft something. I know that I've spoken to a couple of senators on ag. Seems like the chair is enthusiastic. I mean, of course, they would like universal meals, And then the pro tem also seems good with it, but I said I'd run this by the committee. So that's where we're at. Senator Hooker.
Would this still include the?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at Senator Lyons unmuting, and I called Senator Hooker. But please, the floor is yours, Senator Hooker. If it's okay with Senator Lyons.
Would this include the connection between farms and schools?
Yes, we'd stick with that language without a doubt. That's their jurisdiction. Certainly something that I'm really excited about. And I think everybody's excited about. What I love about it is, I mean, I can just speak for myself. If I have a bagel in the morning, I'm not going to have a great morning. Just that's how my body reacts. But if I were to have some farm, local produce or fresh eggs, that sort of thing, I'm a little bit more on my game. So there are real possibilities, I think, there, exciting possibilities around connecting farms and school.
What's wrong with bagels?
No, I love a good bagel. I love a good bagel. Trust me, love. But I just, that's, when you get to be my age, Senator Chittenden, you'll see. Senator Hooker, any other questions? Okay, Senator Lyons and then Senator
has a question.
What's that? Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure I have a question, but I think the question of using local produce is really very important. And so that when you have your omelet, you can put spinach in it. It's
Absolutely.
the right way to go. And then, but I will just say I had some really bad dreams about this last night.
Oh, no.
I woke up worried that there was going to be some kids who got to school late and wouldn't be able to get their breakfast. And then I said, oh, somebody will save it for them. My dream went into great detail about this. So
did it really? That's interesting. Yeah.
I don't know, but I think it's a good solution, and it helps to continue moving toward the goal of comprehensive, full meals for kids at school.
And in all seriousness, your point is a really good one. I mean, we would want to make sure, and I think it would happen automatically, that, Jim, we're talking about universal school meals. I don't know if you've heard about S100 before.
I've heard that before, yes.
Just to make sure that, again, if a family, knowing the household I grew up in, you sometimes get to school late, and make sure that breakfast is still there. It's a good point. Senator Terenzini.
Thank you, Senator Campion. Maybe you answered the question and I didn't hear, but this sort of the snag in this whole thing was the funding piece, in my opinion. And has it been discussed between you and Senator Starr and Senator Ballin about sort of that funding piece, and would it be coming sort of off the top of the ed fund like we originally talked about, or would local school boards and local school districts have to see an increase in their budgets and an increase in the local property tax to fund the program?
Great question. I think that's still open for discussion. Either way, of course, it's going to put pressure on the ed fund. But if you take it off of the ed fund, the top of the ed fund, then decisions aren't going to, as I understand it, aren't going to have to be made locally as to whether or not, choices around doing this and maybe having to cut something else. So I think either way, it is going to put pressure, on the ed fund. And I think it's still a conversation to be had, whether it's one way or the other. I think the enthusiasm from others could be, this is, it is the $25 to $40 million estimate. That's asking a lot to get a program started. This is, I'm not making light of what a $6 to $9 million investment is, but I think it's more reasonable. Plus, if we were to connect it to ESSER in some ways, allowing people to start gradually or getting some relief in the beginning would also be helpful. And I think, just speaking for myself and not so much answering your question at this point, but I do think we'll see some real benefits in terms of student academic performance, health, things like that. Other questions? So, Senator Terenzini, we'll come back to that, and I'm happy to have that conversation in this committee, or it might be something that our approach decides which way to go, one way or the other, but I'm happy to have this committee weigh in. Jim, did you hear enough of our conversation on what I think a draft amendment would look like? And it might be a draft amendment between our committee and Ag that would put us on the path of universal breakfasts throughout the state.
Oh, okay. I did not hear that. So,
okay. So universal breakfasts, and this is just the big picture. Jim, and you and I can talk later if you need additional details. Universal breakfast with some kind of study/implementation plan that would get us to universal meals during, in the next, let's say, just for the committee's discussion, 3 to 5 years. How might we do that? And we would have to put together some kind of group that we can decide on who would be involved in that. School, and we can hammer that out. And then the other piece is making certain that this investment is also that there's a transition, not a transition, but it's using ESSER dollars to start this process, as to some extent. In other words, lessen the blow, and this is something we can pull apart with other committees. But
yeah, I don't think you can use ESSER funds for this because it's not an ESSER issue. ESSER seems to have language that might permit this, but it's an issue with language in
that's right
in CEP and in provision 2 that doesn't allow you to use federal funding to go to universal school meals.
Right. Okay, so we'll have to, Senator Hooker.
I was going to say, can we make a recommendation about funding coming off the top of the ed fund? I think
absolutely. I mean, that seems to be the most logical, actually, and the cleanest.
Much smaller cut. This is a much smaller amount. And
right.
I'm just thinking of yesterday's testimony from Ms. Kruger saying that it wouldn't be difficult to do that. So.
Right. No, she was an excellent, very good witness. Jim, questions for you? I mean, I know that's a 50,000-foot look.
No, it's no problem. I mean, I've drafted so many versions of this bill, but I haven't drafted the task force yet. So the main question there, of course, will be who do you want on that committee?
Who do people think? Think the most recent thing we've passed related to financing, of course, would be the weighting study, and I don't know if that group doesn't necessarily make sense for this, but we're talking about financing. We're talking about advancing school meals. It certainly sounds, to me, it sounds like somebody from the Agency of Education would be on it, like a Ms. Kruger. Senator Perslick.
As I know this issue's been around for a while, has there been other task force on this issue?
Good point.
Which is,
I'm not aware of them in my last 5 years.
Okay. I don't know if Ag, because I know Ag has talked about it in the past, so I don't know if just people bring it to them or if it's been studied. But
Senator Lyons, do you remember?
No, I don't remember, and I mean I don't recall one in recent history, and Jim's probably has the best read on that. But I was thinking about who would be on the task force, and to make it an extremely utilitarian task force. So I would think Economic Services Division at DCF, because they've got some of the concerns about low income, whether we want to go in that direction or not. And then Ms. Kruger, who obviously really understands all of the ins and outs of state and federal funding on this. And then
Superintendents.
So, yeah, I'm, superintendents, they've been pushing back on it, and and we've also had the coalition of folks represented maybe by Honor Horton with the food bank and Hunger Free Vermont. But we don't usually name private entities in something like this. So I was thinking if we had a group of 3 people and then they could reach out to 2 or 3 other people. I don't see this. Help me here. We all feel comfortable with the policy of expansion. It's just how do we do it? So maybe it is the superintendent's.
Well, I could see a committee quickly becoming, and I wonder if this is your point, Senator Lyons, so big that it wouldn't be productive. But if it were tight, and then we said that the following people have to be advisors to this, like we did with weighting. I think it was with weighting.
Yeah.
You have to talk to, consult with the superintendents, consult with the school boards, consult with, the NEA, but really have that tight group of people from the Agency of Education, the Ag Agency, the DCF, somebody from finance, in the finance, just a tight 5 or 6 person committee to really work this through, and then have, like we said, please require them to take testimony and consult.
And I think for me, I think the intent is critically important. We intend to see a funding solution.
Yeah.
Perhaps a transitional period to get us to all the school meals being covered. So,
Yeah, no, I agree. Senator Perchlik, does that sound, having a sort of a tight committee, 5 or 6 people, and then requiring people to consult with some of our other folks make sense to you?
Yeah, I think it just like requiring the state agencies basically to come up with a plan for it or ideas, and then asking them to consult with the stakeholders is the more efficient way to go.
Yeah, and so that would be somebody again from AOE, Agency of Ag,
OEO.
Sorry, what was that last one?
Office of Economic Opportunity.
I think if you put DCF Economic Services in there, you've got the people who do that analysis. I don't know, somebody from somewhere, AHS.
Right, you can just say AHS and then they'll find people.
Yeah, they'll find somebody.
And coming back, Jim, in January with something.
So is there anything to be said about, I don't want to prolong our agony, but is there anything to be said about not, I guess we don't want to even think about it. I'm thinking about property taxes and the education fund and the burden. Do we say anything about that? Is that part of this? And for me, it probably isn't, because it's really important to have kids well fed and thinking.
No, I think what you're raising is a really
I don't know.
point. Well, it's the other way to think about this is back to the weighting study. We did ask people to consider certain things. And one of the things that I would like this group to consider is working with our federal partners to consider federal funding on these kinds of, are there ways to, partner with our federal delegation? We talked about language changes yesterday with Ms. Kruger that might need to be changed in federal statute to make some of this work easier and going forward. So those are some of the things that are on my mind. Senator Perchlik, you had unmuted before I started talking.
I did. No, I can't remember what I was going to say though.
Senator Chittenden.
So I fully support the direction everything's going in here. The other thought I had, because this was keeping me up last night as well, Senator Lyons, was the equity piece. And I don't know how to tie that into this, but there are, I believe from the testimony, 72 schools in Vermont that are currently doing universal meals. And if we truly want all of our kids to have equal access to educational opportunities, I think that also means that they have a full belly when they start their day and can learn and listen more. So some aspect of having some consistency and equal access to food resources, I don't think it should be lost in this discussion.
That's an excellent point, Senator Perchlik.
I remember it was just on the whether we have language in there about funding, because I think in the past when we had the full universal meals, appropriations was trying to figure that out, and maybe we just let them continue to figure that out. Like we can't use the ESSER money, but maybe there's other federal money that they can move around, and they'll have a better handle on that than us trying to figure that out.
I think that's a good point. Jim, do you have Senator Hooker?
No, I'm all set.
Okay.
Sorry.
Jim, do you have enough information to sort of pull some kind of draft together that we could look at sometime tomorrow?
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course.
And Senator Starr might, when we talked today at lunch, they also have time to weigh in on this tomorrow. If this committee is comfortable with having Senate Ag also just take a stab at the draft that Jim would be bringing to us tomorrow afternoon, just have it go to Ag in the morning. Would senators be comfortable with having them take a look and just weigh in? And
it's their bill, right?
It's their bill. We want their support, but.
So, I mean, the question is, whose amendment will it be? Maybe it'll be an amendment from two committee members, two sets of committee.
That's what that would be ideal, I think, if they also, partnered with us on this. So bringing it to Ag in the morning, I think would be great if you're willing to do that, Mr. Desmarais.
Oh, sure, of course. Yeah.
Great. Okay.
And if we need findings, is breakfast still considered the most important meal of the day?
Yes, we're looking at Senator Lyons, the chair of Health and Welfare, for that. Yes,
it is. Yes, it is. It really is. It's all those nice farm fresh eggs and the vegetables and homemade bread. All good.
Go back to school.
Milk.
Yeah. Okay.
That would have helped my daughter, who didn't know what that yellow machine going in front of the house was every day.
What was that yellow machine?
It was the school bus. She always slept through the school bus.
All right. Well, I appreciate the discussion, and I will loop back to our colleagues. And Jim, I don't know what your time frame looks like. If you can get something emailed to Bobby and me tonight, just so we can.
I can send you an unedited version tonight.
Sure,
I'll have it edited tomorrow morning. Yeah.
Yeah. No problem. Thanks.
Yeah.
Senator Hooker. No. Okay. All right. Why don't we then take a break? We have our two witnesses coming in at 4. It's beautiful down here, so hope everybody can go out and just take advantage of the sun. Good afternoon. Welcome back to Senate Education. It is Wednesday, April 7th at 4 p.m. We are continuing our conversation on S-114, the Senate's literacy bill, which now has become the House and Senate's literacy bill with the good work of House Education that has made a number of different suggestions. Senators may recall, we went through this bill yesterday with Mr. Desmarais with the side-by-side. That side-by-side is still up on our website, or if people want to reference it. I've asked Ms. Myers and Representative Webb to come in today. Ms. Myers, senators will recall, is with the Superintendent's Association and was very helpful in both the House and the Senate when drafting this work. And Representative Webb's committee has been working on this issue for many years now, and appreciate her being with us as well. In talking with Representative Webb and Ms. Myers, it seems to make the most sense for Ms. Myers to actually start and to respond, if you will, to some of what sort of where we're at now, if you will. We have some suggested changes. We are in a moment of trying to work through different things to see if we can get to a good point where we might not have to go to a committee of conference and continuing this conversation. So, Representative Webb, in my conversation with her yesterday, she is going to respond to, and just plug in where she feels it is needed and where she would like to, so we can have a pretty fluid conversation for a little bit on this bill and see if we can hammer out some differences. So with that, Ms. Myers, how does that feel to you?
Sure.
Okay. And I should mention, Ms. Myers has been talking both with the House and the Senate and helping us navigate this. So I don't know if you need any additional information from the committee, Ms. Myers. In other words, one thing I could say is I think you know where some of our concerns lie, and so does Representative Webb, around the grant program. So that might be a place to start, if you would, and give us your thoughts in general.
Yeah, so I think it probably makes most sense to just go through things with the core components. So we could start with the grant process, then move to the statute, that there's a difference between how you're handling the statute, the revision of the statute on literacy. The review of the licensure program seems to be about the same on each side. So let's start with the grant program.
Okay, sounds good.
So it's my understanding that the Senate Education Committee would like to direct the funds to the Agency of Education, whereas the House would like to direct it to the Agency of Education, but then to grant out to school districts. I'll just comment based on conversations that I've had with Chair Webb and Chair Campion, that the House Ed bill started at a time before COVID, before federal funds were coming in. So we're in a very different place now. They have structured a really beautiful grant program with a lot of really great methods in adapt or to changing structures around literacy, especially as they relate to Act 173. And I don't think that those should necessarily be lost. I think the connection to Act 173 is really important. However, we are at a time now where school districts are receiving a lot of ESSER funds, and I'm not sure that the urgency to apply for a grant, especially if that grant has a lot of requirements and reporting, that would be a priority for systems right now. So I think that's something to think about as you're navigating this. I do believe that Mr. Demaray talked to the House about potentially allocating money, ESSER money, but then in the S-114 kind of talking about how the Agency of Education might spend that money, or directing some core components of how the Agency of Education might be able to spend that money as it relates to literacy. Mr. Demaray, is that correct, that they could keep the money in the ESSER appropriations and then specify how the Agency of Education spends those funds in that bill, in S-114?
Yeah, so for the record, Jim Demery, let's counsel. That was my understanding in House Education, and that's how the bill's been drafted in terms of the use of funds. Although Secretary French testified yesterday, I believe, that he wants to look at that question once the bill is in a more final stage. So without caveat, I believe the answer to your question is yes.
So I think it's a matter of reconciling those two methods of either granting out to school systems themselves or being a little less prescriptive in the process and giving it to the Agency of Education. And again, I really want to recognize the great work that the House Ed Committee has done. It started in a time that we were not ever expecting to be in. So things have changed a little bit.
So given that change, Representative Webb, were you going to say something?
Yes, I will say that when we started working on this last year, we were looking at a 2-year grant program using Ed Fund dollars, passed it out of committee, and then we hit COVID and it died of COVID. In addition, the Ed Fund was looking terrible when we left last year. So this year when we started, just think about where we were. We had just basically gotten the December vote for ESSER, whatever that one was, 2, I think that was 2. And by the time it got to you, we were just looking at ESSER 3. So I think stopping to acknowledge that the times are changed, that we're now looking at, I'm looking at this as we've got $400 million extra dollars going to schools. So I would actually say, is the grant program the best way to go in terms of sending it to schools? I think that that's a question on the table. I think that we ended up working on this because we heard that the Senate Appropriations was so anxious to get it going. Whereas we had actually not seen that level of urgency because so much money was coming. So if there's a way, I mean, I think that, we took it this far, you've got it now. If we can slow down that process a little bit and not feel that anxiety that need to get it going, I think that there's a lot of maybe better use of that money than doing the grant program. Now I have to take that back to my committee, but I agree that we have a lot different information now, and I think we should use that information. So I'm very comfortable. We have the same goal. And ours is focused really on the implementation of Act 173 and really keeping that at the forefront. But in terms of how we get there, I'd say let's have that conversation.
Ms. Myers, do you have a recommendation, given that I think you're absolutely right, the House did incredible work before the pandemic. We're just in this different stage right now. I think one of our concerns yesterday had to do with, would there be school districts that wouldn't be equipped to apply? Would there be school districts that would be leaving dollars on the table because they don't have, the time, the people power to put applications together? At the same time, I think Representative Webb's good point around, we want people to come up with plans and really have organized, thoughtful conversations. Can you help us get to a happy medium on this?
I can try.
Okay.
So I think I can't speak for the Agency of Education, but I think it based on their testimony, they would prefer it to go to the Agency of Education and them to kind of use their data and their knowledge to allocate it based on their expertise. If you would, I'm assuming that the money, the $4 million is still going to be appropriated to literacy.
Yes.
I also would need to check with perhaps the Act 173 group could connect some of this money and make recommendations to the Agency of Education about how that funding is spent on literacy and how it can connect to the Act 173 structures. You have a lot of expertise in that room already sitting there. And I think it would take a statutory change to just add to their charge that has already been extended a couple of times, I believe. I would have to check in with their chair, Megan Roy, but it seems like if you have that panel already established and the objective is to connect literacy to the structures of Act 173, that might be an avenue to consult with the Agency of Education on how to best spend those funds as it relates to literacy.
Representative Webb, are you comfortable with that if we move in that direction?
No, I think Act 173 group it's a very good group. They're effective. They know what's going on. I would be interested in their recommendations because, again, it's getting to that core major bill that we passed that is really designed to change the way that we deliver education to students who struggle in a comprehensive systems-wide basis.
So if this committee were to work on language that, again, connects the dollars that would go to AOE to Act 173, that's within the comfort zone of, okay, great.
Yeah, that would be great.
Great. Jim, you're there and thinking that about language for something like that.
I am.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you want to, we're working on all your bills right now.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to work on that language and share it, and I can bring it over to S114, see if we can wrap that up, and then we can all have a party.
Yeah. No, that's what we're thinking. If we could get some of this stuff over to you, and then and absolutely on the party front, no question about it.
And then you'll be able to keep H101 as a vehicle should there be some last minute
great
something coming in.
Okay, great.
And we might end up holding the miscellaneous ed bill for any transportation we might need. We're zeroing in on that one right now, and
well, that was a big, what we just discussed was, I think, one big thing. The very big thing is, making certain that we can get these dollars out to schools in that quick, efficient way. And it sounds like we've got something. AOE in consultation with the 170, is it 173?
173
working group. So that's great. Okay, Ms. Myers, please continue.
I also just want to recognize too that group consists of parent network representatives and disability law project and administrators. So you're covering a lot of bases there already. The only last step is making sure you check with Megan Roy, who's the chair of that, to see if they can handle that kind of thing. But I know they've done a lot of thinking about it already, so it seems like a natural fit.
Thank you.
Should we move on to the next portion? Please. So I believe it's the 16 VSA 2903, amending the statute now that's currently on reading instruction, and the Senate bill has it amended right within the bill with the work that you've done, and then the House has recommended that the council amend it. And I think you could do both, or you could do either or. You could do the changes that kind of switch from reading to literacy that you recommended in your bill in the Senate Ed bill. Sorry, I'm trying to keep them all straight. And then the House Ed bill could continue to say we're going to have the council make recommendations. So there could be this change now, and then later the council could make more substantive recommendations based on the work that they do.
Yeah,
or you could do either or.
We saw that as a sleepy little section of law that needed to wake up.
Which council are you talking about?
The Literacy Council.
The council established, I think both of you have it in your bill, to establish a literacy council at the state level.
So I need more clarification. So if we're thinking about the Literacy Council, what exactly, what are you proposing again?
So the House Ed has in their bill a charge that Literacy Council would be responsible for amending or making recommendations for amendments on 16 VSA 2903, which is the current statute on literacy instruction. Okay. So if they made recommendations, I think you'd get more expertise in terms of being able to coherently think about the vision for the state of Vermont on literacy and make recommendations rather than amending it right at this moment in your bill, which is what is currently in the Senate Ed bill.
We saw maybe just letting the experts have a stab at that, as opposed to us.
But again, you could do both, like make these small changes now if you wanted to, and then take recommendations from the council later.
Committee, any preference? Yes, Senator Purcell.
Jim, is that council language in the side-by-side, or do I have to go to the bill? I don't see it. Oh, maybe it is in here.
It's there, yeah.
In different places.
It's on page
23.
16. It starts, I think. 2903, Advisory Council on Literacy.
I'm just looking at who it is again. I couldn't remember.
Yeah, we have, excuse me, I'm sneezing, so if I stop. We had the students in ours.
Oh, right. Is that the only difference?
No, there's some membership differences. That's one of the big, yeah, that's one of the big differences.
I have different pagination than you do, Sam, personally, because I've got a different version of this side by side. Rep Webb asked me to add a third column for H101, but if you're looking at your version, if you can find the part that deals with powers and duties of the council, it's subsection D. The difference in language is that your bill has the council advising the State Board of Education on how to update. Sorry.
No problem.
The proposal by House Education has the council advising the state board how to update section 2903. And your bill, we've already done that in your bill. You've updated that section, so you don't have that as a council with duty.
You've written it in your section 3. You've updated it.
Yeah.
And in ours, we just had the council do it.
I'm just trying to find who we said is on the council. I guess I can't.
Oh, who's on the council? Sorry. Okay, I got a different pagination than you do, but we've got
Page 17, 16 and 17.
Yeah, you got different members. So you've got 18 members and House recommendation is 15 members.
Okay.
Do you have it there? Yeah.
Yep.
I would like to correct the record of one thing that was said yesterday, was that Representative Brady didn't want students on this. That is not accurate. We discussed, we were trying to bring down the number of, based on our appropriations and also the functioning of group, we tried to bring down some of the numbers. So we figured that you could put some students in the community members if you wanted the people with experience with dyslexia. We added someone with, in the community members that have had experience with challenges in reading. I'm sorry, I'm not looking at the language, so I can't quote it very well. We added someone with expertise in dyslexia.
I think that's great to add personally. Yeah. With regard to the students, I mean, I can just speak for myself. One of the things this committee's been working on, or have had many conversations around civic education and how can we specifically get young people involved in our processes. And that's why, in part, we thought it would be great to hear specifically from students.
And that's fine. I'm just looking for this. I don't know if I'm missing something. Am I missing a page? Well, I put them in the wrong order. Members of the council. Okay, yeah, so we had, I don't know why I'm having so much trouble. Let me put it this way. You need to have people with lived experiences with dyslexia. I will also tell you, but don't tell my committee this. This is a secret just between those here.
Great.
I took out a few members figuring everyone was going to add them back. Okay. And it didn't happen. So
well, let's just
but that's a secret. Okay.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they're not watching this. We're not live right now. Just ignore that.
Right.
But
so yeah, I think you have to have someone with lived experience. You have to have lived experience if you want that to be a student or a graduating,
Yeah. Okay. So we can work on some of that. Senator Perchlik.
Okay. Now that I've figured that out, I could go either way. I'd like the students just to give the students experience more than than anything. But I like the idea of making it smaller. They can work better if it's smaller. But given that, now that I remind myself what it is, who is on there, I think Chelsea's idea of just making those small changes, reading the literacy, and then I'm okay with the council being the ones that decide how it, the details of how we should change the statute as the House proposed. I think that's fine.
Yeah. Anybody else, anybody against moving in that direction? Okay, Ms. Myers.
So my next point was the difference between the membership of the council. So I don't know if you all want to talk about that now, or you feel like you have it resolved.
I think we're in good shape. We'll keep it smaller and somehow, Jim, specify, we want to make sure that there's somebody in there that is an expert on dyslexia and has, some experiences. Senator Perschlick?
Well, when I looked through the list, and I'm sure they could convince me otherwise, but I wondered about the school board association. Obviously they're involved in everything in the schools, but I just wondered, when I think of what the school boards do, I don't see them as involved in that kind of level of pedagogy. And, maybe they want to be involved, but I can't remember if they wanted to be involved or we just went through our regular cast of characters and put them all in there.
I'm pretty sure we went through our regular, instead of cast of characters, we'll say professional advocates. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, that's what we said. I don't think they were married to the idea of being in there. So that is one area that we could say we could pull them out, and that does make it tighter. Yes, Ms. Myers.
I would just say if there's anything to do with policy in there, they should be involved. The other added benefit is that it's a way to, it's a community member, and the overall visioning, like if we think about this from a systems perspective, the overall visioning is the responsibility of the board. So it might seem like a stretch, but I think if any policy is included in the council's charge, that they should be on the team.
Okay. Maybe what we could do then, because we could talk about the makeup for a while, we could work, maybe Representative Webb and I could work with Mr. Desmarais and try to get to a happy point, comfortable point with the council, and include just knowing that we want student voices there, we want people with lived experiences there, and we don't want to, and keeping in mind that these policies are going to intersect with the V's and others. So I think that's good to know. Okay, please continue.
So I believe that there's not any differences between the licensing and relicensing review. So we'll skip that. I'm sorry, I'm not going in order. I'm going by my brain.
No, that's
so
fine.
If we're skipping around, I apologize. And then I think the last thing to discuss that there are differences between is the position, and how that all kind of changed with the grant manager, and then it turned from a grant or a program manager to contracted service. And that kind of happened in appropriations. And so I want to bring up the conversation of a position again. And I know that there are significant financial concerns and nuances with the ESSER money coming in and what it can be used for. But I will say, I think it is important to recognize that statewide leadership on literacy, like a person or a division, like if you look at many state agencies around the country, especially those that have made huge literacy efforts in the last few years, they have whole divisions related to literacy. And so I think just a person to touch all kind of avenues situated in the agency of education makes a strong message. So I would like to open up the conversation again and understand that there are fiscal concerns as well as the concern about being able to hire a person in a timely manner. So maybe it's a hybrid of the two solutions somewhere in there.
I think Representative Webb and I, and correct me if I'm wrong, Representative, feel that the hybrid, I mean, I think we both agree that there is the need to have that person at the helm throughout the state. You mentioned, Chelsea, if we were to get on the Massachusetts state education website, they have all sorts of literacy experts and people within their agency. And we would be starting by, again, getting somebody that the level who reports to the Secretary of Education, but also recognizing there might be a transition in terms of getting that person. In other words, something could be done now for the next couple of years, but we need to get that person in place as soon as possible. And I think some of this will come down to a conversation with our appropriations committees and making the case saying, listen, this is a big deal. This is a game changer. Having somebody who is at the helm that we can continue to pull into our committees over the next decade to ask for updates, it's really important. I mean, we can't be asking, others to do this work. Representative Webb.
So when we passed 173 in 2018, one of the people sitting in our room all the time, helping us with this with amazing expertise, was the deputy secretary. There were 2 deputy secretaries. That year, they got rid of that position. So we basically lost the main brain trust on pre-K 12 for this kind of work. Amy Fowler was the person that worked there, and her loss in terms of where we were going with 173 was significant. At the same time, so we lost the deputy secretary. The CFO moved to another agency. The general counsel retired. The special ed director retired, and the counsel for special ed retired. So there were 5 major people in that agency that had a tremendous amount of information in 2018. So I would very much like to see, another, Amy Fowler position in that agency. I don't know how they ended up just striking that position. And Rebecca Holcomb left. So there was so much change that was going on that year that was really fell, and some of the work here fell. So I know that our committee had put it in as a position, but the Appropriations Committee did take it out. If there is a way to hybrid something, I mean, if we're going to be using some money to do some real professional, large-scale support for districts to upgrade their whole system, and we could have someone at the agency that's overseeing that. I think your challenge is going to be to find someone who will take that for just 3 years.
Yeah, I agree.
We're looking for a PhD.
It's a great point. We have to really recognize and I think carve out the money. And I think we should have a conversation with Senator Kitchell and Representative Hooper on this to make sure that we can really take this forward. Otherwise, I agree, it's going to get dropped. It's in the work is too important. Senator Persley.
Yeah, I totally agree with both the chairs there. And I almost feel like the council and the $3 million for the grant program aren't worth doing almost if you can't have a coordinator to really focus the work and keep it going. So, my hope would be that it would be longer than 3 years, but I understand often they do a limited service, but.
I think it has to be permanent. I mean, we have to think about this because I think Representative Webb's point's a good one. We're going to get the best of the best. Sure, we might get lucky and that person might be in Vermont and they might, but if you're going to move here, you want a position that is going to continue is just going to be ongoing. Senator Lyons.
Yeah, so I'm absolutely astounded that 5 positions have disappeared. So usually when that happens, they're held vacant. So my question would be for the secretary about those vacancies that exist right now, and that we should be defining the need. We have to fill one of those vacancies with this position. So I don't know if Representative Webb knows more about this.
Those vacancies have been filled other than the deputy secretary. there's only one deputy secretary. I mean, maybe you really only need one deputy secretary, but why that position couldn't have moved down was a surprise to a lot of us.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we are in a good spot. I think we've ironed out differences. And Mr. Desmarais, do you have the information that you need?
I have the information I need on the grant program and on section 2903.
Right.
You're going to talk to Chair Webb about the makeup of the council.
That's right.
No influence, a few sections. Aside from that, in this position, obviously, of the agency, is an open question. There are some other differences, though. So, excuse me. You have different, a few differences. One difference is that you've got the Board of Education updating the statewide plan, and one on one side, on your side, Senate side, and you've got the agency doing that work on the House side. In consultation, both in consultation with the council.
Yeah.
Because who's taking the lead on that is one open question still. At the very end,
Jim, just pause for a moment. Senator Lyons, go ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking while Jim was talking. Wait, I have to turn my phone off. There, sorry. That if we fill that position, then it would make eminent sense for the work with the council to go to the new person, the new position, and the planning go in that way. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why the board would then have to be doing that.
I agree, to have it go to the new person in the Agency of Education. I think the House is accurate. I think they have more of the information and they have the ability to advance this. Ms. Myers, anyone else?
I just want to be clear, we're talking about the statute now? The change
no.
to the
No, we're talking about updating the literacy plan.
Which is 2903?
Yeah, it's in 2903, but it's already in law. So there's a section here that I'm trying to find it because my pagination is different than yours, but it's a section that requires the statewide literacy plan required by 2903 to be updated. And on the one hand, you've got the state board doing it. On the other hand, you've got the agency doing it. So the question is which one to go with.
I have no opinion on that.
Okay. Senator Perschleck.
The House had the agency?
Yes.
The agency, yeah. I think so too. I think that makes sense. I think it's the way to go. So let's move it to the agency.
And then the other difference was at the very end of the side-by-side, there's difference in reporting requirements. And the one the House used is based on the Agency of Education's recommendation. So I'll have the page number for you again, but it's section 12 of S114 as proposed by House Education. And it's section 9 of your S114. You want to take a look at those two and just...
Yeah, so I'm looking at them. What's the big difference here?
So looks like on the House side, they've got quarterly reports. So they're doing quarterly reports from July of this year through July of next year. Okay. That's House version. Senate version is they're doing a report once in December of 21 and again in December of 22 and 23. So it's quarterly reports on the one hand for a year versus 3 years of reporting in your bill. I think that's the main difference.
That was just what the AOE gave us.
Okay.
So we just took it.
I'd like to give them a little more time, but I'm open to, if this is what that's the only thing I was thinking, Representative Webb, is can that first one, will they push for July 1, 2021?
They gave us the language, so I took it.
Okay. Anybody object to the agency's recommendations for the report, since they are the ones who are advocating for that? Okay, I think,
Wait, okay, can you remind me what's in the report? Jim maybe could do that.
Sure. The report that they recommended is on the status of implementation under this act, so under 114, and on any other COVID-19 related topics relevant to your policy jurisdiction.
Ms. Myers, I'm sorry, Senator Lyons.
No, I'm agnostic.
Ms. Myers.
I don't know what they'll be able to report in July, so it might make more sense to give them a little bit more time. I think it would just be, we're getting started if you had a report in July.
Are you okay with the first one coming in December 2021, Representative Webb? Okay, fine. We'll do that.
I'm with Senator Lyons.
Okay.
Okay. So what I can do is I can update the, what I think I would do is update the House proposal.
Yes.
With what we know. You know, I won't update yet, obviously, on what we don't know, which is the membership and the position, but I can get pretty far with it.
Great. And Representative Webb, if you don't mind staying on after we adjourn, you and I can hammer out the membership a little bit and have Mr. Demarais right here. And then I can run it by the committee for a final look tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be at a chair's meeting, but
or I'll just ask you, ask you for a little bit of introduction after we adjourn.
That's not going to be a big one. Could I just make just one recommendation to consider? Please. Have you had DMG in to talk about that? We got so much of the vision of what we were looking for children who struggle to learn, and so much of the vision that we got from them when we developed 173. So if you're interested in really looking at a vision, they do a really nice job. So if you have time and want to hear from Nate Levinson, if you don't, you don't, but it really sort of gives you an idea of the vision that we're looking at.
Great, thank you. Committee, it was a long afternoon, but I think a productive one. Any final questions? I'll loop to Senator Kitchell today and stay on with Representative Webb, and then we'll also hear back from Mr. Peralt on Ms. Parker, I believe, on CTE funding. Anything else that anybody else wants to raise at this point? Final questions? Okay, yes, Senator Hooker, please.
Just that the conversation about positions sort of brings up the idea that we're still looking for a diagram of the Agency of Education's positions and where they are. So
yeah, and so this was one of the things I want to talk to Mr. Demarais about is some language that I'll bring to the committee also about an audit, really putting us on the path to understanding the agency's size, the direction it should be moving in, helping give future legislators, I think, a blueprint and the agency a blueprint in terms of needs and areas to improve, because I think no one is feeling as though they're well equipped now to do everything that we need them to do. So great. Okay, thanks everybody.